Why didn't any of Luke Skywalker's marriages last?
Why is that?
He always followed Obi-Wan's advice. Use divorce, Luke. Huh? Am I right? I had my laptop out just for that. I don't have any notes today. I have my laptop out just to do that bit for you. So
hold on. Now I'm attempting.
Okay.
I'm attempting producing. So I'm gonna do my introduction, and we will see.
I thought the show.
2 hours later.
Okay, you know what? Take it away. Why am I fighting you taking work off me? Like, just
I was about to say,
go for it.
this was the boss that doesn't want to give up his control. I can see that.
It's a task I don't want to do, so it's not even like, oh, I don't trust you to do it well.
Well, no, to be fair, you don't and you shouldn't. But that being said, hello everyone, Darth here, and welcome back to another overly analytical episode of That One Scene, the podcast where we dissect one single Star Wars scene to see exactly what makes it tick. As always, I am honored to be joined by the actually brilliant master of language writ large, Jedi and Sith alike. Please welcome the infamously verbose DC McNeil.
Boom! That was me drawing my weapon, Darth. I've also just pressed start event in Discord. I don't know if what that's going to do, but we'll see. Today's a day of firsts for us on this podcast, Darth. Thank you for having me. So last time we spoke, you used the Star Wars scene as a backdoor to talk about like some philosophy and some life stuff. This time, I've got some Star Wars philosophy as a backdoor to talk about more Star Wars.
Cool. And I guess are we ready to jump right into the topic? Because I'll go on and kind of like briefly introduce it.
Set it up.
Yeah, I'll set it up like as you set it up to me, because I didn't really have much to go on as far as like what you wanted to talk about. But
that's the best episodes of this show.
Yeah, right. So the topic today is going to be the controversy about Luke Skywalker using the dark side in order to force choke the Gamorrean Guards in episode 6. Was this something that Lucas intentionally did, that he set up Luke's fall to the dark side in episode 6, or is this something that fans are retconning as they try to prove that Luke either was or wasn't the pure noble hero that they want him to be? Mr. McNeil.
It's so true. It's so true. I like that we've now got lighting effects. You're really stepping up the show. Meanwhile, my new podcast setup is lit like absolute garbage. So I feel like you took 2 steps forward and that pushed me 4 steps back. Is what happened. I can't cut to the wide angle because that webcam is covered, but you should see this room, Darth. It's absolutely delightful now. So yeah, it's interesting. I want to foreground this with, I'm not blaming Austin Walker, but he was certainly one that brought this to my attention on an episode of More Civilized Age. Screen Rant have written this article basically being like, okay, I guess we should set up the scene. So at the start of Return of the Jedi, we see errant knight Luke Skywalker returning to the stage after some time away, presumably growing in strength and growing in maturity as both a Jedi Knight and a hero. He's now sort of the fully fledged Luke Skywalker Jedi Knight that we're expecting to see moving forward. And he turns up at Jabba's palace, and it's like a 10-second scene. Like, it's very, very quick. He force chokes these 2 guards, and then he walks through. And the crucial thing about these 2 guards is they're like weird pig people. What did you call them?
Gamorrean, I believe is the pronunciation, but don't
Gamorrean.
at me because that definitely could be wrong.
Yeah, that seems like something you should know. Okay. All right, interesting.
Yeah. To be fair, like I know exactly how, when I see the word, I can picture them. But my brother and I both had the same thing when we're like, as readers, we don't care how to pronounce the word. We just need to recognize the word when we see it and know who it's connected to. Which is just saying. Yeah, which is just fascinating. Like Admiral Thrawn, when we're reading the books about him, and his entire name was Mithron Nuderodo, and
yeah, dude, worst fucking name ever.
And so he and I would just see the M word and know that the long M word meant the dude. But then our friend who's reading the books, every time he sees it, he has to pronounce the entire thing all the way through in order to get through that sentence. which is just such an
that's
interesting...
a broken kind of person. There's a character in The Mountain Under the Sea called Alison Stag. She's like a Russian character. And that's one of those names where every time I read it, I just read the A and I go, yep, that's her. I don't need any more detail than that. I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out this lighting situation. If I move this here. Cut this if you want. Or if this is riveting content. Hold on. I've got a light in my... Maybe I just do the whole podcast like this.
Actually, yeah. Actually.
Actually, now that you said... Oh, he's doing another bit that's actually a really good idea. Here we go.
I mean,
there we go.
When you hit your face with the light like close up, I was like, oh, that's dope, actually.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing is I haven't... Okay, that's slightly out of frame. I just haven't figured out the lighting for this setup. But we'll get there. So, yeah, he chokes these guards, and there's a really crucial couple of things that this Screen Rant article talks about. And Austin Walker very briefly talked about it on the podcast, and then was like, we can't because I'll be here all day. And so I want to be here all day talking about it. So Screen Rant, and kind of as a result of the Timothy Zahn trilogy and a bunch of Disney stuff recently, people are sort of claiming that in this moment, Luke Skywalker did not, in fact, use Force choke on these guards. And instead, and this is the way that the book in the Zahn trilogy portrays it, and we can talk a little bit about why that is for that particular version of Luke Skywalker and what it says about him. In that book, Luke remembers it as, I convinced them that they were choking, and he sort of tries to self-justify it, right? And there's a couple of reasons in the Screen Rant article that make me absolutely crazy, just like out of my fucking mind, because it's like you have to deliberately misunderstand the film to get to the place where they are in that article. We'll get there. So 2 things I want to start with, and these are the 2 big topics I want to talk about today. Luke Skywalker definitely chokes these dudes. And then second, why it's important that I think it's less important what you label the force power usage as, and it's more important that he does it for the story, right? Something that I think is kind of a crucial understanding of these films as they originally present is Luke doesn't have, like, he doesn't go into his like weapon wheel and select force choke. He's using the force in like an aggressive way that feels natural to him and like an extension of his body and an extension of his powers. He's not like choosing to use a dark side power, right? Like, yes, it's dark side and he's channeling into his aggression throughout a lot of this film. And that's obviously what the journey of the film is will he flip to the dark side or will he redeem himself and Vader? But like, he doesn't decide to use force choke. Do you know what I mean? Like we talked about this a little bit before with like Kylo Ren and Rey with some of their powers and how all that sort of unfolds. Like, it's not as if Kylo Ren like decided one day I'm going to learn force freeze. Do you know what I mean? Like he learned a way to wield the force in like a particular kind of way. And then when one force user sees another force user do something, they're like, oh, that's a technique I can practice because I've seen someone do it before.
I really want to pull out something that you have said so many times and be like, Luke didn't decide to do anything. The writers had something they wanted to communicate. Now, what are you trying to get to?
That's exactly my point. Is him doing this? Is this character channeling a level of aggression? Because I try to demonstrate that he's starting this film at a place where he's willing to do something like this. Because that's the character's arc in this fucking story, and it drives me crazy that people are like, actually, you'll find that it actually makes more sense for Luke to use a mind trick. Because what that actually means is that he doesn't actually fully turn to the dark side. That's actually better for his character arc. It's like, what? Did you watch the film? It makes me crazy, Darth, and I need to know that I'm not crazy about this.
Well, actually,
okay. Well, tell me from your perspective, because I'm clearly in a hole about this.
I don't even know how to get into this without getting into a much bigger conversation, because I very much disagree that his arc in episode 6 is all about him heading towards the dark side and then having to choose not to fully go there. Much the same way as we had the whole discussion about like the entire trilogy being Vader's redemption arc. Like Luke's turn, quote unquote, to the dark side, his temptation to the dark side all happens in the last like 20 minutes of the film, exactly like Vader's does, and we retroactively infer that he had this grand journey to get there, when in fact there is so little evidence, which we could fully blame on the writers. Like, if they did want to have him tempted the entire time, we needed to see much more anger, much more aggression, much more of him almost losing himself and his friends having to pull him back and say, whoa, you're going too far. We don't have any of that. So the evidence just is not there for me to agree with that stance, which is not just you. Like, tons of people have cited that same thing, that 6 is about Luke's temptation. And I'm like, it is not there. One time he pulls the lightsaber and tries to strike down the Emperor because he's mad that his friends are about to die. And then he does the same when he's fighting Vader because he's mad that Vader just said, I'm going to turn your sister to the dark side. So we've got those 2 instances. And then we have the third potential discussion that happens with the guards right here that we're talking about. Aside from that, what evidence is there? So that's what I don't know we should get into, because that's a much longer conversation.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms. I mean, he's in the all black Darth. I don't know what to tell you, man. He's dressing up like Darth Vader. He's coming in a big hood. He spends the entire film in a black outfit. Like,
and the interesting thing about that outfit, because you brought it up, is that they intentionally, I don't know if you remember, but at the end of it, the outfit gets askew and there's one corner of it that's flipped down and it's white. Yeah. And that's supposed to be showing like his, like the, I don't know, the crack in the evil broke and his light is shining through, or, you know, something like that, that happens at the very end. But again, I blame this on the writers, on the directors, because there wasn't enough, he wasn't evil enough for there to be any light to shine through. It was all light until the end. It could have been like the reverse, like he's wearing pure white and then some black starts to show up at the end of it from like soot in the battle, or, you know, something like that. And then like that color change would make sense. But having him be all in black, I never really took as a like evil indication, even though, you know, the bad guy generally wears black.
Yeah, especially in Star Wars, right?
Yeah. Now I have a multi-page monologue to go on whenever you get most of your discussion out.
Okay. Did you, first of all, did you manage to read the Screen Rant article?
Yes, and ironically, I don't like it. I don't like the mindset. I don't like the need to retroactively go back and try to defend the scene, because I think that people are interpreting the scene incorrectly.
Yeah. Okay. So that is kind of where I land, right? Is like you didn't need to you don't need to go back and rehash this in this attempt to like rehabilitate this moment for Luke Skywalker, right? There's a kind of there's this instinct, I think, and we've talked about this a little bit before. I just want to kind of explore the idea out a little bit. There is this idea of, or an instinct, or a desire by some to have text be like fully explainable and like have every aspect of a text be completely explicable at all times. Darth is like, yeah, that's me, dude. Yeah. And one of the instincts that results from that, or one of the activities that results from that, is people. It's an exercise I often will describe as squaring the circle, where there's something in the text that maybe isn't fully like ortelic with the rest of the text, right? There's something in it that creates a little bit of friction with an easy, smooth read of a particular text. And what they'll do is they'll go back and they'll keep rereading the text until they can invent new evidence or a new explanation for why that friction doesn't exist, right? This was the entire Sherlock show that we did, right? Every fan theory we talked about, those are all attempts to remove friction in the text, which is a result of like bad writing choices or odd writing choices, or Stephen Moffat losing his GD mind. But I think at a broader level, one of the things that happens in Star Wars in particular, and this is something you and I have experienced just across the lifetime of us talking about Star Wars together, is there's an instinct to want to suture up some of Lucas's, they're not even really choices. Sometimes it feels like an absence of a choice, where something lands in the original trilogy or in the prequels, and it's more interesting to talk about than it is as part of the story. And I think a lot of the time when that happens, people go, well, I need to solve that detail or solve that decision, because otherwise these films weren't as perfect as I remember. Right. And I think it's definitely like I'm not sure what you would call that instinct, but certainly I think this type of Screen Rant article fits into that, where you're taking something out of context, which is Luke's feelings in the Timothy Zahn book about what happened. And obviously, you know, in that story, Luke is like deeply in his feels for the majority of that book, and is still quite immature, right? He's not dealt well with the fact that he was this hero, and now he just has no role in the rest of the universe, right? He's just completely adrift, trying to figure out his place. And that's why he's reflecting on these moments and kind of trying to recontextualize them for himself. And I don't necessarily think that it's fair to take that story and go, Luke reflecting on this moment adds evidence or adds weight to changing the context of what happens in that film, which is he fucking chokes those dudes, right? Like there's a way that instinct for me speaks to a larger exercise or a larger instinct of a portion of like the Star Wars community or the Star Wars fan base.
Did you happen to know when that article was written?
It was quite recently, I think.
Okay, so one of the theories that I was suspecting, I did not delve in to see if I could somehow prove this, was that this controversy popped up much more recently, or at least it hit stronger after the sequel trilogy came about, because Luke's character was degraded in the eyes of a lot of fans. And so when they're having their discussions with the people who enjoyed that take on the character, and those people would say, Luke has always had this dark streak, go back and look at how he choked the guards. So now you have the people who, you know, maybe the guy that wrote the article did this in a knee-jerk reaction to thinking about the sequels, thinking about, I don't want that character to be who this guy grows up to be, so I have to somehow in my mind do these mental gymnastics and fix what came before, so that what came after I could more easily ignore, instead of having to admit this was there all along.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you feel like that rings true to you of like a lot of the community that feels that way about Luke? Like, is that like are people sort of like, do you take that as like a portion of the community sort of seeing Last Jedi and seeing where Luke ends up and kind of going, well, that's not my Luke. Let me go back and reaffirm what my Luke is versus this Luke. Like, is that kind of the corollary to that? Like the opposite of that?
There definitely was a whole lot of that going on. You know, when the sequels were fresh, there was a whole lot of comparing, you know, in this scene he did that, and then fast forward to the sequels and he did this, and it just doesn't make sense. And then the other side of the camp, you know, the Rian Johnson saying this is exactly his character and it's exactly consistent all the way through my film to, you know, what came before.
Right.
So yeah, it happens all the time. But also the way that people compare, I think is flawed at like on a foundational level, because you're comparing retroactively to something that was the original that didn't have context at the time, and now you're assigning context to it, which is basically the point of my entire monologue that I've got written.
Well, I mean, go for it. It seems like a good juncture. What do you got? This is like a good interval. You say written, you mean you've got this in your notebook, right? Like you've written this out by hand. This is like a handcrafted rant.
Yeah. Which it's only, it's not bad.
Okay, it's tame. He says, flipping through pages. It's not that bad, dude.
Well,
all right. Well, the floor is yours. What do you?
Yeah, I was saying that in comparison to a decent DC McNeil work, it is nowhere near what I would expect you to come in with.
Yeah, it's like Bale. Are you drinking from a Daredevil? What was that? What was that cup? Is that Wolverine?
Yeah.
I don't know. Wee Deadpool sitting on top. Interesting. Oh wow, you got the cups from the film. Interesting. See, this we don't get this over here necessarily. We don't get all this fun merch that comes with all these films. You know what I mean? We miss out.
I was so psyched. I literally like left work in the middle of the day to go to the theater and say, "Hey, can I have the 2 cups, please?"
Oh, you went.
Yeah.
You know what you are? You're the people when we went to see Taylor Swift. You're the people who like went the day before to buy their merch. In retrospect, I should have done that. I would have got a t-shirt way sooner, but I don't think to do stuff like that. My brain just isn't wired in that way. But those are very cool. Are they like like is it like a hard plastic? I couldn't tell what texture that was.
Yeah, I would
like
I would call it more like a rubber. Yeah, that's definitely rubber all around here.
Yeah. Because it's got that look of like.
Got the look of what?
It's got that look of how the when they film like the rubber like muscle superhero suits and stuff, it's got that kind of look to it.
Yeah. Especially like his is like super dope.
It's like real. Oh, it's like really textured. That's cool.
It's really got the same texture as his suit. Actually, I mean Wolverine's does too, but he looks a little bit more dorky in his growl. But you have seen the
Hugh Jackman chin,
You've seen the joke about the two Batmen, right? For Wolverine.
The what? Oh.
So Wolverine's face is just two Batmen kissing.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, I see that. That's funny.
I can't
I've
unsee
never
it.
thought about that. Yeah, that's crazy. Wow. There's a comic, one of the Marvel DC crossovers. This is getting real nerdy. One of the Marvel DC crossover comics, Wolverine and Batman combine into one character. It's fucking sick. And now that you've said that, I'm like, oh yeah, because the designs are basically the same for the cowl. I've never thought about that before. That's wild.
Which is funny because I've been so deep into Daredevil and the details, and y'all are always talking about how much Daredevil is like Batman and all of the throwbacks and everything.
And no one's talking about how Wolverine's just like Batman.
Okay. So we already talked about we definitely, I guess, need to do an entire episode on the whether or not Luke's fall to the dark side actually happens, whether that's a story arc that sets up or not, because that was my entire like kind of first point.
I'm worried that would lead to a 7-hour Darth essay though.
Yeah, totally would.
Yeah, that's one of the slippery slope things that we can only do if we've got like an entire summer free. Because that'll just become us for like half a year.
Yep. Now, ironically, like several of these points very much coincided with what the things that you said, but I think kind of came from a little different angle. So I just thought that was really interesting. But it kind of started off with me thinking that the choke was not something I ever saw as evil. It was just a tool of the Force. And the problem that I see with the comparison that's going on with, the one camp calling this a conspiracy and they're trying to redefine Luke's character and he was evil the whole time, is that scene of Luke choking the guards has two interpretations. The original interpretation versus the expanded universe interpretation. So in episode 4, we see Vader use the Force choke and we see Obi-Wan use the Force persuasion. And we could view these as like passive and aggressive uses of the Force. But at this point, there's no context for us as the audience to know like what power is quote unquote evil and what power is quote unquote good, because it's the first movie. We don't have anything. Skip ahead to episode 5. And Lucas seems to very intentionally show that the same powers of both good and evil are shared between both of them, because everything that Luke does training with Yoda, all of the telekinesis, is the same exact stuff that Vader does later on at the end of his fight with Luke. So in my mind, that is directly showing it's not the power, it's the intention behind the power. And then by episode 6, when Luke comes out and he does the same Force choke that Vader did in episode 4 and several times in episode 5, I think that was a intentional comparison to show Luke's advancing in his training so that he can now do this technique that supposedly the master, maybe it was only the Master Vader who could do this. We don't know because we've never seen anyone but Vader do it. And now he's able to do it. Luke is able to do this with no effort compared to when he when he was in the snow, he was trying to force pull the lightsaber to him, and it takes all of this concentration. He's trying to lift these rocks when he's training with Yoda. It takes all this concentration. He can't do it. And now he's able to do the Force choke with just a wave of his hand, no effort, nothing. So just by this one thing, by duplicating the Force power that we see Vader use, we are able to see that Luke is now on the same level theoretically, as Vader is. So it's setting up the fight that's going to happen and know it's going to be on much more even ground than the last one was. And what it also shows is that with episode 5 having all of the powers of telekinesis shared between the good and bad, and now with having the force choke shared between Luke the good guy and Vader the bad guy, in my mind, this is even more reinforcing the point that it is not inherently a bad power. It is just the user and their intention when they wield the power. Next, to briefly quote the script for episode 6, Luke raises his hand and points at the puzzled guards, who immediately lower their spears and fall back. The young Jedi lowers his hand and moves on down the hallway, unquote. And that's roughly how it plays out in the film. When Luke raises his hand, if you look at it, his palm is open, he's pointing, as opposed to every other time that we've seen the force choke technique used, it is always this. So whether or not that means he is using a different technique, if he is actually just confusing their minds and persuading them that they're choking versus literally choking them, to me that actually doesn't matter, because it's not the how that's important, it's the why that's important. And looking at all of those different sources that I've been citing, looking at Luke using this as a tool just because it's something that the Force offered, which is like literally what you said when we started this thing, that Force choke, when the original trilogy was around, was not something that I think was meant to be inherently evil, quote unquote. Fast forward to 2005, after all of the prequels have come out, we've got all of these novels, comic books, we have a huge extended universe that now exists. And now the franchise is deeply steeped in all of this lore that was not there at the beginning. And now all the fundamental rules of the Force have completely changed. And now you can't force choke someone without dipping into that dark side. As far as you could tell in the films, that was not true in the originals. It was just a tool of the Force, but now it has changed and force choke has become inherently evil. So we already talked about potentially why this happened with as a reaction to the sequels and people wanting to try to hold on to the heroic nobleness of that hero, and they don't want the noble hero to be using the evil power. But I maintain that looking at all of the uses of the Force throughout the original trilogy, that it was not an evil power, and whether he was physically choking them or only choking them in their minds, it was no different than a good guy shooting a bad guy because the good guy shoots the bad guy. And he was not doing it out of malice. He was not doing it out of anger. It was not unjustified. So I do not think that this argument has any merit, because people are taking the info that exists after this happens, the lore introduced after this happens, and trying to retroactively apply it to this scene where it just doesn't fit.
Yeah, 100%. This is the exact thing we talked about throughout Sherlock, which is like, this is a character in a story, right? It's not a person that, like, he's not a person, right? He doesn't have an interiority in the way that we do as people. And the point about it being a tool, I think, is ultimately where I land, where this is, he's doing something to deal with the situation. It's not necessarily like encoded with any particular vector, right? Like, it's not like this is good or evil or whatever. And you can look at that scene and be like, yeah, he choked those dudes. But then that doesn't necessarily, it's not like a ipso facto, all of this other stuff is true, right? And this is why I think this is what really bothers me about people who invent different watch orders for franchises or continual stories that aren't just the release order. Because a prequel is a film that is in conversation with the films that came before it. So you have to watch it in that way in order to understand what the filmmakers of the prequels are trying to say about the original stories that the prequel is about, right? You can't watch, say, this is a terrible example, but you were holding a Wolverine cup. You can't watch Wolverine Origins before you watch the other Wolverine films. You shouldn't watch Wolverine Origins, to be clear. It's a bad film. But if you would go, if someone put a gun to your head and they made you watch all the Wolverine films, that's one of the Wolverine films that you would watch in release order because it only makes sense in release order. Because it's in conversation with what happens in X3 and everything else that's happening in the X-Men universe at that time. It's just I think it's a fundamental mistake in reader response theory to do exactly what you said these people are doing, which is taking this extant material, this paratext, and trying to wield it to change what happens. Because whether you read it, I agree with literally everything you said, whether you read it as Luke force choking them or mind tricking them, it doesn't actually change the fact that this isn't like a good thing or a bad thing at this time. And you look at it back retrospectively and you go, oh man, that's like kind of evil. And then you can kind of have different readings of this text to be like, oh, like how dark-sided was Luke, da-da-da-da-da. And like, that's a valid exercise to do, but I think you have to be honest with yourself as a reader and go, that's an exercise I can do. And I can read this film as, man, like Luke, he's just like on his evil shit right now. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what the film is trying to do, but you can have fun with that reading and you can have fun being like, oh man, like, and that's where you get those cool alternate universes, like where it's like, oh, what if Luke like didn't redeem himself? And you can kind of see the evidence there and you can follow that through as like an Elseworld type story. It doesn't change what's in the text. It doesn't change what the arc there is for Luke's character necessarily. It's more fun to me if he chokes them because I like a more complicated Luke. But I think you're right. I don't think it changes what's there and what we're supposed to take from it. Other than it's fun to me that Luke can do this force choke thing so effortlessly. And your point about the power level and like this being a contest, you know, if this is indeed force choke, I think it amps up the stakes because when Vader does it, you know, he's standing still and he's really concentrating and it's like, it's his entire, you know, he's closing his fists and shit. Luke just does this effortlessly. Do you know what I mean? It's so quick for him to do. It's like, well, he's mastered this technique in such a way that maybe even Vader hasn't, right? And that's kind of compelling to me as well.
There's another really interesting way that we could look at this, and this is just hilarious because all of this discussion could have been generated just due to a last-minute decision on set. Because if you think back to the quote that I pulled from the script itself, the paragraph prior to that describes when Luke like raises up the door and walks in, and it says something like he is obviously unarmed without a blaster or lightsaber. So he just walks up to the guards totally unarmed, which is why it says that they are puzzled because this unarmed dude just broke in and is walking right up to them, and all he does is point at them. And at least the script that I pulled up was completely ambiguous as to whether he actually uses the Force or whether it's just, I'm not afraid of you. And the guards just fall back. Now, when they were actually filming that scene, what do you think that would have come across as? I think it would have come across as kind of confusing. So it would have made total sense that they intended for him just to walk in, just being ballsy and Han Solo kind of way, and he just bluffs his way past the guards. But then they get there and they're like, we can't have this. We've got to have him use the Force. And so they're like, just wave your hand or something. And then they got to tell the guards what to do. So they're like, just pretend you're choking or whatever. Like that could have...
Yeah. That seems really credible to me because on the day when you're filming it, you might be like, it seems kind of goofy and like it's not the badass, like, it's not communicating what we wanted to communicate, which is like, this is Luke Skywalker, knight errant. Like he's here. He's not fucking around. And for him to just be like, what's up? And then walk past, like that doesn't have the same, doesn't have the same gravity and impact.
Yeah.
It's interesting. That seems so credible to me that it almost feels like that must have been what happened.
Yeah. Right.
Your point about it doesn't matter which one it is also really interesting to me because I think in some ways it might have been better if he force choked them because otherwise he's like breaking a Geneva Convention or something. Do you know what I mean? Like that's like psychological warfare. If he's mind tricking them to think they're choking, because that's like, I think when people put that forward as an explanation, I'm like, how would that be less evil coded? Like that's crazy to me.
Yeah, because like if you force their mind to imagine they're underwater and they suffocate and die, is that less painful than putting them underwater so they suffocate and die? Like,
yeah. At what point should you just have run them through with your laser sword? Like there's a real, what's the word for it? There's a real like, juggling of like morality and ethics that has to happen for you to get to that point, I feel.
Yeah. And that's what I said, is that it's, at least I think that this is all stemming from the people who feel like their idol has been brought down several pegs, and they're like, I can't have this. I've got to figure out a way to make him still have the nobility that I grew up imagining this character to have. So therefore,
Right.
what must have happened in this scene, because what I see is obviously not true. It's got to be something different.
Right. But as you said before, they're reacting to everything that's been written about Luke since, right? They're not necessarily reacting to this moment.
Yeah, I actually love the idea, because this actually happens at least with one character I could remember that is a Jedi that uses Force choke, and it is not like the angry Vader, like I'm literally killing you because you brought the ship out of hyperspace too close. You know, it is like, be quiet, I'm talking, and it's just like he like. And granted, this Jedi that I'm imagining as Sabath was a wee bit towards the dark side, so you know, grain of salt there.
I'm sorry, you're trying to say that? Well, he's a clone technically. You're trying to say that like you're trying to say he is a wee bit toward the dark side.
A wee bit.
That man is
that man
is a clone of a Jedi who is now a Sith, I think, from memory.
Yeah. So the one that you're talking about is the clone of the guy that I'm talking about. So the guy I'm talking about was like the original Jedi Master, who he just got a little more unhinged after they got on outbound flight, and the further away they got from the main galaxy, where he was the primary, he was the source of power because he was the strongest one on the ship, and there was no one else within light years, and never was going to be again. So he could dictate everything, and that got into his head a little bit. But the point being that when he would force choke you, in the meaning that he would just shut off your vocal cords and not allow you to speak.
Damn.
So the way that you could do quote unquote force choke and still be a good guy, like I don't think that there is a problem with Luke using force choke. Like in my head, Mace uses it all the time, like all the time.
Dude, that's his go-to force power on missions. You know that's the case, right? Like this dude doesn't give a fuck.
Like I could totally see him like sitting at a bar, and the bartender comes over and he's running through the whole spiel of, you know, today our special is blah blah blah, and Mace is like, no, I want a whiskey. Give me the whiskey.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, he's like, shut up. Oh, like yeah. It's like our seafood special. He's like, right? Glenfiddich 12, neat. Like that is very Mace coded, I think.
Yeah. And it's not evil. He's not hurting the dude. He's just very efficiently making him be quiet.
Darth and David talk their way backwards into thinking that choking people is like net neutral. Homer Simpson wasn't a bad father. It was a neutral activity.
Well, that's not where I intended that to go.
This is what happens with Star Wars, man, is like, because it's such an abstract world, it's so easy to end up in these like complete like quagmires of like, yeah, but in this universe it behaves differently. And then you're like, but in real life, don't choke people. That's my PSA. There's also something that, I mean, obviously you should never read a Screen Rant article in your entire life because it's just morally bankrupt. But I think there's also something I find really interesting about the kind of microeconomy of sort of, I'm not sure what you'd call it, but this kind of, this insistence of some of these vendors and some of these people that, you know, editorial styles and editorial content of like catering to the worst instincts of a particular readership of particular texts in like such ways that just require you to be like to actively be ignorant of the text itself. Like, I don't think you can get to a point where you read this moment in the way that that article does without having to actively disengage with what is happening on screen and kind of go down that Sherlock style pipeline. I think it's really interesting to me how much this has come back full circle from Tumblr in like 2012.
I mean, to me, that kind of read like this guy, the writer, was a fan who was doing those mental gymnastics and trying to make it make sense. And he was just like, oh, you know, this is what I'm thinking about. I'm sure other people are too. So I'm going to write an article about it.
Exactly.
So it definitely could have been something that he was, you know, just trying to play into the hate and just get clicks based off of that. But I don't know why something about it actually felt like genuine to me. But then also I was just like, you're wrong. And let me tell you why.
This is one of the few that one scenes where it's just us being like, well, actually, the whole time. Do you remember when we did that Kashyyyk one, which I think is like one of our best episodes, one of my favorites, like super interesting discussion. And someone was like, "Oh, why would you talk about this scene for an hour?" And it's like, did you? That's the show. Like, did you not watch that? That's what we're doing. Like, it's so like, it drives me crazy. Yeah, I read it as earnest as well, but I think the place it comes from is really disingenuous. Like, I think the exercise can be earnest, but I think the motivation of it is we talked about this a lot. I think toward the later seasons of the Sherlock show, it's kind of like something happens you don't like in the story, and so you actively disengage with the material in front of you to produce an outcome that's predetermined. And that to me is like a really disappointing way to engage with text. And it comes across as very defensive, as a way to process text, and kind of immature in a very particular kind of way where it sort of requires you as a reader to not come to the table and realize like, oh, like I've staked a part of my personality in this text in a way maybe I shouldn't have. And like, obviously we talk a lot about Star Wars, and we have a lot of investment in talking about it, but I think it takes a lot of energy, therapy, and a strong ego to be able to take a step back and go, this thing that means a lot to me doesn't define me. And people that stake parts of their personality in particular franchises or particular texts are doomed because eventually something about that text is not going to work for you, or is going to be bad, or they're going to make a legacy sequel that sucks, and then they're going to make another one that's good, and it's always going to be complicated, and you're going to hate Solo, but it turns out it's actually a good film. You're going to have all these complicated feelings about it. And I always feel really bad for these people because it's like someone just needs to sit you down and go, buddy, it ain't that deep. It's just cool dudes with laser swords and shit. It's awesome. Just have fun with it. Like, relax, surrender, enjoy it. Do you know what I mean?
But that's really also that's the beginning of like an entire 2-hour conversation about what the role is of probably specifically heroes in story, because from your perspective, the hero is just playing the role in that story, and whether that hero stays a hero or not, like shouldn't matter that much to the viewer. They should just kind of sit back and enjoy the story as it unfolds. Whereas for so many people, the hero must remain a hero the entire time because like that is part of their real life inspiration for living. And that could get into a really dark place of where like so many people in real life are having a significantly tough time. And as they're going throughout their day and everything just sucks for them, they're able to think Captain America is doing great things and I can do this. Captain America inspires me. And I can keep going about my life because I remember what I feel like when I watch those movies and I see him come on screen, and that gives me hope for the future. And then all of a sudden, this comic comes out and you find that Cap was actually working for Red Skull the entire time, or whoever it was. And he was actually a villain in disguise this entire time. And like, now you are destroyed because like that was the thing holding you up so you could go to your crap job.
Yeah.
But is the story, are the creators responsible for delivering a consistent hero because some of their audience needs that consistent hero?
Right.
It's really tough.
And we know what my answer is. But I think it's interesting. The thing I struggle with is disentangling that conversation from the fact that I'm an author and a media crit and a media writer, and that I run a publishing house, right? Like, I really struggle to disentangle it from the fact that I'm on the other side of the craft, and I can empathize, but I can no longer sympathize with people who aren't thinking about text the way that I do. That's the real difficulty I have now. Is I'm kind of too far down the pipeline. It's that thing of like, once you know enough to know how much you don't know, you keep chasing that, and then eventually it becomes really difficult to look at people who don't know what they don't know, and not go, let me bring you into the fold, like let me help you. Right? That's kind of the exercise of Zero Indent. That's a lot of the content we've done as well around Star Wars, is like, let me help you get through that initial doorway to start to help you relieve yourself of that burden, and to start to help you take a step back and realize that there might be healthier ways that you could be approaching where you find inspiration, and where you invest your personality and the stakes that you have in your personality, and the things that make you go, and the things that give you inspiration, right? And I think this comes back to like a much broader conversation we've sort of had across the years that I think is probably particularly relevant in some of the stuff me and Pat ended up talking about in the 3rd season of Daredevil in the Details as well. But I think the exercise, or we have a responsibility as educated people in this space to help educate others and to help uplift them, right? It is my firm belief that, the educated owe their education to the ignorant. They owe it to the ignorant to educate them. Free people owe it to those enslaved to help free them, right? We have an obligation to use our privilege to help those who lack that privilege, and to help open the door to people who potentially, just because of the circumstances of their life or their upbringing, wouldn't have an opportunity to gain that education otherwise, or have no vested interest in gaining that education otherwise. But the benefit of media criticism and the ability to better dissect text is not explicit to text, right? You've just demonstrated a really good example where it can blow up to the rest of your life, right? If you have the ability to, when you react to something like this Luke Skywalker stuff, or you see Luke in The Last Jedi and you're disappointed, if you have better tools to understand how stories work, you're better equipped to not have that deeply impact you on like a personal level, right? You're also then better equipped to understand what's working about a story and why maybe you don't like something. You're better equipped to decipher the way that people leverage ideology and lies and grifts and positioning and politics in real life, right? It gives you these skills that are so transferable. They give you the ability to like identify a grifter, or realize that someone has a particular agenda, or you can see like rhetorical maneuvers being produced in real time. Like, these things aren't explicit to storytelling, but it's a really great place to start, because text is self-contained. You can read a text and you can talk about it for hours, and you can get a lot out of it. You can come back to it and read it differently, right? You and I could sit here and we could do a full read of this film that we're talking about from both perspectives. And that could completely change how we take Luke's character by the end of that story, and what we think that final confrontation is. We could have a great time doing that, and we're only able to do that because we have this tool set and we have this education. I think I worry for people who, the people that we were just talking about, the people who, for them, it's a real body blow that the Captain America was, this underground Hydra agent the whole time, instead of what it should be, which is like, oh, it's like a fun comic book twist, and it maybe is like a warning about, questioning who you consider to be a hero, and keep in mind that everyone is a person and everyone can be gotten to at some point. There's that great Dan Harmon quote when he's talking about, George Bush and 9/11, where, he's sort of talking about the fact that, like, if you have to do terrible things to get into the position of being president, then it's a terrible position. There's no two ways about that being true. And I want to find a way to empathize with those people and give them mechanisms to better engage with the stories they interact with and just life in general. And I feel like over the years, the more we do this and the longer this goes on, I think the more true that becomes, but also obviously the more niche we get, because, you get further and further into specific mechanisms, and, the stories, the Zero Indent stuff I want to do next year after Daredevil Born Again comes out is like increasingly more niche, right? But I want to make sure that we keep being able to have these conversations where we maybe argued 5 different arguments about the Luke thing, and neither of us went, well, you're a fucking idiot and you're a woke douchebag. You know, like we're able to do this and use these tools and come to the table. And I'm really passionate about trying to do that in small community, right? Small scale, making sure that like it's an audience who is going to benefit from this. And I worry for people that react so bodily to these things. I was a dumb teenager once, right? Like I was that kid when Sherlock was coming out, and it completely changed who I am when I came out of the other side of that. And I want to give that to more people. I want to give them that tool set. And Luke is such a contentious character in the modern era, you know. I don't know. You picking up what I'm putting down?
So I think the natural next step of that whole monologue is, what do you do about it? So if you have, and I'm sure there's another character just to like bring it away from Luke, because in some way I think that could make it easier to talk about. Batman in the third movie, Dark Knight Rises. That was one for me that I thought that character was totally broken. There was nothing noble about him. He had given up on everything that in my mind made Batman, and I despised that character. And so if Batman was a character that really held my life together and is something, you know, that I looked to when I was having dark times, and now he's broken in my mind, how can I take that experience and turn it into something positive? How can I not just see broken Luke? How can I not just see broken Captain America or broken Batman? And maybe part of the answer is to really sit and evaluate what is it about the characters that I did love so much, and what changed that moved them into this broken state, what could have transformed them into this broken state. And then now I know this is what I want to be. This is what I could turn into. And this thing in the middle is what could break me if I let it. So now I know I want to be this hero. You have defined these things. You could put that list up on your wall and say, I want these qualities. These are the qualities of Luke that I admire, that I want to have in my life. This is what could happen to me if I'm not careful. And these are the exact things that will break me if I let them.
That's 100% it, right? It's going, why is the story doing this? And what might be it trying to convey about getting to this point, right? The thing I really like about Last Jedi Luke, bleep that, censor that if you want, is, I don't know, man, you know what I mean? Because you bleep that if you need to, Johnson really is trying to say something about what it meant to be this character at this time. And you see this show up in the Zahn trilogy as well. Granted, I haven't finished them. I got like halfway through the second one. I haven't picked them up again. But no one knows what happened in that throne room. And Luke has to bear the weight of the very small number of people around him knowing this. And he's a wartime hero. He's not a peace guy. You know, he was in very much the same way that Ahsoka is kind of raised during the Clone Wars and only knows how to be in wartime mode. Until she gets much older. I feel like Luke is very much positioned like that in the Zahn trilogy, and then obviously to a greater extent, whatever the decisions were about him starting a Jedi school and trying to kill Ben or whatever the fuck that was about. But, there's a really interesting mechanism to me there, which is like, yeah, just because you were this great general and this great fighter, it doesn't mean that you have a place in society when that's over. And that when you are called to do these great acts of violence or take on these great acts of heroism, there is a consequence and a price to be paid, which is it changes you irreversibly, right? And so one of the takeaways from, let's pick the example you had, Batman from The Dark Knight Rises. One of them, the biggest takeaway there is like, you can't stake the peace of your society on a lie. That lie will eventually come to light. You have to stand up and you have to do the right thing, right? The reason why Batman retires is, yes, he's getting older, but also he and Gordon lied about what happened, and they celebrate this guy who untethered and became a murderer, and they put him up as this idol of goodness, and he wasn't. He fell, right? They try to preserve the aesthetic of heroism rather than doing the brave thing, which is confronting the truth and trying to better themselves and trying to get themselves in a place where they can actually help the city of Gotham, right? And that's what you see at the end of that film and that's why Batman has to get his spine broken, and that's why he has to rebuild himself, is like he has to find that anger and that drive again to step back up and to take on Bane. And when he does, it fucking rules. Like, that film is so good. And all of the haters out there are wrong. I wrote an article about it 2 years ago. You can go read that if you want. I love that film because it's unnecessary. The Dark Knight completely wraps up that character. And what I like about The Dark Knight Rises is it's a coda to the franchise. It's a, hey, what actually happened later on? It's got very little to do with the rest of the franchise. And it is really dealing with, okay, these big action scenes and these big action movies that everybody likes are all well and good, but like, what happens like a decade later? Like, how is everybody dealing with the outcome of this stuff when it's not exciting and it's not life-threatening anymore? And then a new threat arises, obviously, in the form of Bane. And I just really like how straightforward and exciting that is as an idea. And they really paint Batman in such an interesting way where, his initial return kind of distracts the cops from actually catching Bane. You're like, yeah, this is kind of like, he might be a problem now. And I really like the way the film is able to play in those spaces and have something to say about what it means for this character to come back out of retirement. And to do so elegantly and with such interesting throughputs for, this universe. And that's part of why I really like the Batman we get in The Batman, the Matt Reeves film, is he's a really young, kind of ignorant character in a lot of ways. He hasn't really come to a lot of the realizations we expect for this character. He's very early in his career. He's still completely fueled by anger. The scales haven't yet fallen from his eyes. He hasn't yet realized he needs to be a symbol to the city. He's only interested in being vengeance, right? And I like that he's moody and weird, and he doesn't really say much. And there's something about that gives them a lot of room to move this character. Something you said earlier really resonated with me, which is people who, they only want to see this character, this heroic character, frozen in like a single mode of being. They want to see like, I only ever want Spider-Man to be like a good dude, right? You get to Spider-Man 3 and it's like, fucking Peter Parker might be the villain here. Like, and that's really exciting to me because like, yeah, people go through different moments in their life, and I'm a materialist, so one of my fundamental beliefs is like, people are influenced by the ecology around them, whether that's like infrastructure, industry, people, ideology, the system in which you live, the country in which you live, how you were raised. All of those things produce like the ecology of what influences you to be who you are. And as those ecologies change and evolve or degrade, that's going to change who you are, right? You think about all of the Walking Dead franchise, right? All of these characters in that ecology can become killers. If you don't become a killer, you're dead, basically. And you have that whole arc with Morgan where he is trying to be a pacifist, and eventually Rick has to be like, dude, that doesn't work anymore. Like, that might have worked at one time or another, but we're in the middle of a war and we need you to step up here. And I really like that stories that exist across great lengths of time, or stories that are really well written, can take characters and move them through different modes, and have something to say about like what it means to have a psyche and be a person, right? One of the things I always say is you read nonfiction to learn about the world, and you read fiction to learn about yourself, right? The way that we process characters, their arcs and their decisions and the worlds they inhabit, and particularly genre fiction, allows us in an abstract setting, without it being like a self-help book, to internalize lessons and internalize things about the way that we want to live our lives, which is exactly what you said, right? That to me is like the point of how you deal with this stuff. When you have those moments of friction and you feel yourself reacting emotionally to something, whether in a positive or a negative way, that is what media criticism is trying to do. Is it a large portion of it? And I obviously don't have any stake in Jung or Lacan or anything like that, or Freud or anything like that. Psychoanalysis does very little for me. I'm obviously more of like a ecosophy guy, right? But like the ways in which you can pull out different lessons, and you can kind of start to think about what that means for you, or think about, oh man, like that character made that decision, like, and it lives in your head rent free. That's what I love about stories that work and are working really, really well when they move characters through those spaces, is it gives you something that sticks with you and it lingers, and it, you turn it over in your head over and over and over again. And that to me is the exciting part about those moments of friction, is that opportunity.
It's one interesting aspect that we haven't really touched on, and something and everything you said got me thinking about Superman, because it may have been the first reboot. I don't remember if it was the Zack Snyder one, where Clark is working as like a waiter in like a dive bar, and the logger comes in and is like throwing beers at him. And then Clark goes out and like puts the trees through the guy's truck. Right?
Yeah, that's Man of Steel.
So like when that happened, I mean, like, granted, you don't see it, but I still was like, I hate that. That's not Clark. Like, he was supposed to be raised to where at this point he has the good in him. He's got that Kent goodness. And but then at the same time, this is a different actor that is portraying a different version of the character. So in that sense, I'm able to choose which Superman movie am I going to watch, because then that will have one of them is the version that I personally can enjoy. The problem that we have with Luke is that Disney had one chance to quote unquote get it right. And because, Mark Hamill has X number of years left, and this was
old, man.
This was their one shot. And so that is what like so many fans have said. It was like, we had one chance to see Luke as the Jedi Master, and we waited 30 years to see what he would be like when he grew up, and we get him moping around on an island.
It's awesome. It's so good.
Like, ironically, I want I want to agree with you. Like, it's so funny. There's like an irony in that, and I like, part of me loves that story in the same way that I love like Marvel Zombies, because it is something like out there and unique, but like, is that where you would have preferred the story to go if you have one chance to do it, because the actors are all about to age out, which is something that you don't have with Superman or Batman. These other franchises, Doctor Who, like James Bond, golly, is like every other franchise. They don't have don't have like dedicated actors,
When they also haven't backed themselves into the same corner that Star Wars has, which is it's a series of films about this one family. Like, I think that's the biggest weakness of the current canon, right? Is like, it is so singular in its attention that it's only when you have stories that step outside of that attention that can really like flourish and thrive and be really compelling, right? We quite liked a lot of Acolyte, and I would have loved to see a season 2. Andor is the best thing Star Wars has ever done, right? Like, there is this thing that Star Wars can't escape from, which is exactly what you said, which is they had one chance to get it right. They blew it for a lot of people, and they weren't able to then fix that in the final film of that trilogy. And so they just stuck pinwheeling like in the main series of films. And it seems so obvious to us as like people that talk about this stuff and write stuff like this. Like, there are so many different things they could do in this universe, and they just stuck because they keep trying to make films that sell instead of trying to make films that are good. And I think that's like the biggest issue that Disney has, is it's it's entirely driven by capital. And it's about, we're going to put in X amount of dollars and we need more money to come out the other side.
Yeah, because at least for me, and I think that I'm speaking for a lot of other fans too, but if they had stuck with this storyline of the broken Luke and Rey and all of this other stuff, if they had stuck with that, but had a really good writer pen all three films at once,
Yeah.
and it had been so good that each film could have spawned its own mini movie. You could have, young Kylo Ren, young Rey. You could have all of this other extended universe stuff, because the core trilogy was so good. But instead, we had such a lackluster story that in many people's minds, and actually probably factually, you could argue that the entire franchise kind of broke when the sequels came out. It is broken and it is fractured, and you have the different camps now. I mean, I know the same thing happened with the prequels, but the internet was not nearly in the same state as it is now, so it's definitely much worse this time around, with the fracturing of the fan base. Mm-hmm. And I just, like, even though I would not have wanted Luke to be broken, they could still have done amazing stories if they had not been so focused, like you said, assumedly focused on the Capitol and all this other stuff instead of just good storytelling. But like, it's not just that they broke Luke and had Han be old and useless and like so many other issues. It's that they didn't replace it with anything worthwhile. There's nothing left to get excited about except retroactively going back and seeing Boba Fett or the stuff with Mando or like other stuff. And they're like, oh, forget about what we did before. Here's something shiny over here.
Yeah. There's a reason why all of the Star Wars stories and the TV shows take place during the same period of time. Like, that's not an accident. I also think, like, there's something you said really resonated because, you're like, oh, if they'd been really good, then we'd have all these spin-off things. It's like, the Batman was so good that they were like a quick Penguin TV show. Like they did. Then I firmly believe that franchise, if they keep making those Batman films, will be that. They'll be like, okay, the Batman ruled, we're going to make a Penguin spin-off. The next film is about Mr. Freeze or whatever. Here's our Mr. Freeze spin-off. Here's our Riddler. It has the juice for that in my mind. And the Penguin TV show is proof of that. It's just a absolutely cracking television show. It's so good. And I wonder if part of the problem that Disney is having, or Disney was having, is exactly what you said, which is they just didn't go into it with a clear direction, it doesn't feel like. They weren't like, okay, this is what we're replacing the original stuff with. Feels like they got caught between trying to include enough iconography of what people recognize as Star Wars and then trying to do this new thing. And then neither of them end up going anywhere. And then by the end of it, they just like have they have like whiplash. They're like, Palpatine. Like it all feels very, it feels like absent someone in the driver's seat quite a lot of the time, or they're making decisions that are very reactionary. And you look at how Solo landed with an absolute wet thud, despite being quite a good film, and they suddenly got really gun-shy about everything. And they were like, oh, we've never made a Star Wars film that missed before. Like, that's really interesting to me as well, especially given Filoni was already deep in Rebels at that point, and you had Clone Wars that everyone really correctly celebrates as a great TV show. It's just fascinating to me how different the movie approach of Star Wars has been to historically the cartoon approach of Star Wars, and just how confident one was, where the other isn't. Really interesting to me. And obviously the stakes are higher with the films, but it's kind of it's interesting.
And to bring it full circle, like I think probably one of the reasons that the sequels had so much trouble is that it was the same issue as we started this entire discussion about with, if you look at the originals, the lore is different than if you look at the prequels, than if you look at the books that came after that. And you have to be really deep into the entire universe to understand, because there are several references in the sequels that talk about the original trilogy and like what Vader was thinking, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't think that's true at all. I don't think what he just said is actually at all what was in the original trilogy. So like if you don't have, and that's what we talked about with Luke force choking the guards, and people are retroactively, changing what happened in that scene because they're applying prequel era stuff to that original trilogy scene. That problem is just going to keep compounding as more lore gets added. And the new directors, if they're not focused enough on the story and trying to make it as cohesive as possible, you're always going to have this issue of stuff not meshing, and then fans being disappointed at having to try to retroactively go back and figure out how to make this previous scene make sense to whatever they just made. And that's going to keep happening over and over. And in Acolyte, it was the twin girls born of a Virgins of the Force in some fashion.
Right.
And now people have to go back and figure out, okay, well, how was Anakin born? Why is he special if these girls are also special? And what do they grow into being? We'll never know because it's never going to be a season 2. So, and it's just...
We'll probably find out in a comic or something.
Yeah. But every new thing that comes out, there's always going to be this problem, which I guess circles back to what you said about how people are going to have to very much proactively learn how to interact and dissect the media that we consume, because things are going to keep changing and evolving. And if we don't learn how to properly diagnose what's happening and understand our reaction to it, then we're just going to be sad and grumpy all the time because we don't understand why Luke is sad and grumpy.
Yeah. And then you get it. And then someone offers you a tool to fight that sad loneliness, which is, oh, well, it's because of woke, or it's because of this, or it's because of that. And then someone's able to take advantage of that feeling of isolation and that feeling of needing it to be someone's fault. And if you can make it someone's fault, it makes it so much easier to die, because then there's a bad guy that I can blame for why all this stuff is wrong. And that's why I think one of the most challenging things is for people that get stuck in those spaces and get taken advantage of. It's pulling them back out of that. That's like really, really, really difficult, because it's so comfortable, and you've found a new community, as it were, or a new kinship in the people giving you these tools. And because you lack the literacy in that moment to realize what's happening, they can then take advantage of you further. They then push you further and further into these pipelines and into these different belief systems. And so next time they need a grift to achieve something, or they need you to believe in their next part of the culture war, they just wheel out a talking point, and you're like, well, everyone around me is saying that that's the case, so it must be true. That's what I was saying before about the benefit of being able to read text and understand the way that people use rhetoric and ideology, and the way that you can kind of take a text and remove yourself from the emotional response is, if you have those tools, you can recognize those things for what they are, right? When someone gets up on stage and they say, hey, if you vote for the other guys, it'll be the last election. And you think to yourself, hang on, I'm pretty sure that's what you guys are trying to do though, right? You can start to develop really good instincts for when someone is doing these things, and it's always patterns of behavior, right? It's always the same type of people repeating the same patterns of behavior. And the second you can recognize it, you can insulate yourself from the grifters and the charlatans that would take your isolation and your anger and weaponize it for their particular agenda. And their particular agenda never benefits you, because they know that you're unable to kind of pick apart what's happening, get to the other side of it. They're never going to be doing something that's beneficial for you. Because the truth is, like, we've talked about this a lot. Truth is that, like, life is really complicated. The universe is full of entropy. It's just complete chaos. There's no big unifying, like, thing that's happening right now. Politics is really complicated. Stories are made by people in time. There's no single turnkey that will solve reality or solve a text that will make Luke good again, or make Luke bad again, or that it was because of woke, or whatever the fuck the thing is that feels like it could fix the thing. It can't. And I realized that's one of those really difficult things, because it's not a comfortable resolution to a question like this, but it is just the truth. And I guess for me, the reason why I think the decision around, say, let's say The Dark Knight Rises, right? The reason why I find that much more compelling than if he just had been good the whole time is, well, then we get we get the opportunity to figure out how we make him good again. And I think that, you can look at The Last Jedi in that same vector, and it completely changes how you process why he's in that position. The fact that he's in that position and that like there's an opportunity for him to, at the end, kind of redeem himself with a final heroic act. Like, yeah, man, hey, if that's how Luke goes out, that's how Luke goes out. At least he had one last shot at being that guy, at being this version of himself that he used to be.
So, in summary, Luke absolutely used Force Choke in Episode 6. Any final?
Luke used Force Choke. Dark Knight Rises is good. Captain America, it's okay if he's evil. Is that the 3?
And all of the bleeping that happened mid-episode was not you cursing. It was just you saying that The Last Jedi was good.
God damn it. Also, I find it curious that you used a hypothetical example of someone that hypothetically was really invested in Batman growing up. Just hypothetically, says the man with a cabinet full of Batman figurines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really
put that on screen. Shame yourself.
I really like Batman.
Yeah, he's a big Batman guy. It's crazy that we don't have a Batman podcast already. That's crazy to me.
Well,
that's like Patreon.
There's something upcoming, maybe, right? Maybe
Patreon goal. Yeah, maybe. Well, we're definitely doing that. And technically, Daredevil in the Details is kind of a Batman show sometimes. But yes, we're definitely doing that. I don't know when this will come out, but yeah, November, December, we're planning on doing a probably not 7-hour. Who knows? I mean, we could talk about that film for ages. But yeah, we're going to do a deep dive on the Batman in the same way we did for Solo. We're bringing back the unhinged format. It's going to be very exciting. Me and my brother are watching it again on Saturday night, this coming Saturday. And then I will do my usual thing and watch it and take notes. So it's very exciting. I'm looking forward to it. I haven't finalized the cast yet, but I'm gathering people in. I know Patrick's keen. We'll get Ryan involved. We'll get my brother involved. It'll be good. We'll have a great time.
Yeah, I'm quite excited.
Yeah.
Anything else that you're working on that you want to pitch?
Just my usual pluggables. Zero Indent on YouTube for all the stuff. We've heard us talk a lot about Daredevil in the Details. It's the current show that's going out. Underink.press. Oh yeah, when this comes out, our new merch drop for the holidays will be out. You can go to underink.press and you will find that on the homepage. We've got a whole new range of heavyweight cotton tees with some great designs. There's some really, really cool like neon paint designs that we have for the logos. There's a Fuck Capitalism t-shirt if you're so inclined, and then a censored version that we made because of Darth, because we're cowards. There's a couple of hoodies. There's a writ large shirt as well if you want something to represent us in your life, and there's some other bits and pieces as well. We've got 2 designs that we're finalizing this week. So yeah, that's where you can find me, underink.press. You can also find my books and my Sherlock book. If you're interested in a lot of the kind of concepts we talked about, Give Up After 3, you can find it everywhere you buy books or at underink.press.
Yeah, I loved it. I don't remember how you phrased it, but you said something like, "Don't get a big head," but my designer agreed with you, and we need to do a censored version of the shirt.
Yeah, I was very annoyed. I was like, I don't want to give Darth the credit. I guess I have to.
It really did
and
make my day.
Look forward to content next time where I'll have figured out my lighting. So that'll be exciting.
Yeah. I'm eager to see that. That looks like a dope picture up there, but I can only see the corner of it. That
Hang on, let me quickly. I can cut. Hold on.
Oh snap! Yeah, I like that. Okay. Got the 2 chairs there. We can do some interview stuff. All right.
Yeah. This shot is really overexposed. Well, yeah, it means that we can do like podcasts in person and stuff. So when me and Pat record, we'll record in person instead of being jammed into like the tiny closet that I used to record in. And then we've got we've got a, you can't see it, but there's a bunch of mic stands over there. Yeah, it's all coming together, man.
Cool. Dope.
We've got a giant TV in the corner so we can like play games on live stream and shit. It's gonna be great.
Sweet. I don't personally have any pluggables. I've been focused on IRL stuff and getting my actual life together. So that's why I was like, hey, let's do something where I don't have to like do any editing or any writing or anything like that. Let's just get on and talk.
Yeah, that's fair.
I still have actually my my Acolyte review. I've got a good bit written on it. So
just trying to get Rye's fucking audio. That's my biggest blocker at the moment to that. Rye, if you're listening to this, and I know you are, upload your Acolyte audio.
When he started to say he was going to join us, and I almost typed in, not until you give us our audio from the last one.
I was literally thinking that until he said he wasn't coming. I was like, not until you give me the audio. Maybe flaming him here will encourage him. I don't know.
All right. I need to come up with a witty outro, but good night and good luck.
What? May the force be with you always. Press and stop.